Hi, this is Brian from Northwest Bronco, and today we're going to talk about Rough Country's high winch mount for the Ford Bronco. They just had a Black Friday sale that happened, and I decided to take advantage of it. So I got the mount and the winch for about $600 and change, which turned out to be a pretty good deal. If you've followed my channel in the past and you've seen that the zero light package I had, I used to have the zero lights on the front and then the ones on top. I found that the Z-Roads lights on the top or any lights on top make a significant difference in driving. So I really love those. But the front ones along the grill didn't really do much. So I decided to take them off and replace them with a winch, which when I go out in Central Oregon or out in Southeast Oregon desert, I really don't want to get stuck out there. Or maybe I can help somebody else out who's stuck. So I think a winch is going to be better for my vehicle. So in this video, we're going to talk about the quality of the item, the instructions, how it functions, and also some installation tips and tricks. So here we go. Why I chose this winch mount. I have adaptive cruise control because I have the Lux package on my Bronco, so the sensor sits right down here. Now, most winch mounts will block that sensor unless you get an entirely new bumper, which I didn't want to do because I like the bumper that comes on the Bronco. I like the looks of it and I like the feel of it. And I didn't want to put on a whole new bumper. So this is pretty much the only mount that doesn't block that sensor that you can attach right onto your bumper. So I like that aspect of it. The quality of when I opened up the box and took a look at the quality, there's some imperfections in the welds and it's not the smoothest thing you've ever seen, but it is all powder coated. And then once you get it all mounted up and everything's all together, you don't notice those imperfections as much. It actually looks really good. So I was pretty darn happy when I was done. Installation took about 6 hours because I have all the sensors I had to relocate, which is just a sensor here and a sensor here, which were in the bumper. And you just kind of put the extended wires on, you just put them right up in here. No big deal. It does come all disassembled, so you kind of assemble the whole thing on your workbench, and then you put it on the vehicle. Let's talk about the winch. I picked the Rough Country 9500 winch simply because I like to buy items that work together. So if it's a Rough Country mount, if I put a Rough Country winch on it, I know there's going to be no dinking around, no modifications. It's going to work as described in the directions, which is why I chose this winch. Plus, it got some pretty good reviews from some pretty hardcore guys. So anyway, that's what I picked. They have a 12,000 weight winch also. I chose not to do that. No particular reason except for I wanted to keep the weight down on the front of the vehicle. So the 9500 should do just fine because my Bronco weighs about 6,100 and change pounds, plus all the gear on it. Let's just say 7,000 pounds. Plus when I do winching, I have a pulley system, so that's going to double the pulling power of the winch. So it'll be fine. I'm not doing anything extreme, just in case I get stuck in a little mud hole when I'm out driving out in the desert. So, or maybe I can help someone else out who's stuck. So with a pulley system, you should be just fine. Let's see. All the parts were there in the box, so I didn't have any missing parts. As I followed the instructions, all the parts were there, so that was a bonus. And also, when it comes to following the instructions when you go to install this, don't follow them like to the T. Like I think most of the time when you install anything in a car or Bronco, the instructions are usually pretty vague. They're usually not quite all there, or they're a little off. But they're assuming that if you're going to install a winch yourself or install lights yourself or a roof rack, that you have some basic knowledge of how to do this. So when you follow the instructions, just kind of take it with a grain of salt and be like, hey, if it says use a 15 millimeter socket and that socket doesn't work, well, find the socket that works because it's an error in the instructions. And also like the order of operations in the instructions with this, especially when it comes to putting together the mount and then mounting it on the vehicle, kind of use a little common sense and kind of use your own judgment on what order you want to go in. And we're going to talk about that right now. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the install. In the instructions, it tells you to assemble, there's 3 parts. There's the actual bracket that connects to the Bronco, the winch plate, and then the winch. It says in the instructions to assemble this whole thing on your workbench and then put it on the vehicle. I went on Bronco 6G and got some good tips from guys that have mounted one of these before, and I follow along with their tips, and good thing I did because it made life a lot easier. One of them was, if you have the sensors that you have to relocate, which are here, you have to pull your bumper off, which is only 6 bolts. It's very easy. Pull off your bumper, take out your sensors, and then you're supposed to just put those sensors through the holes and then mount your bumper back on, but those wires weren't long enough and they kept pulling back in the hole. So a good tip is after you remove your sensors from the bumper, add the extension wires on now and then feed those long wires through the holes so they don't pull back through when you put your bumper back on. Then you'll just have your wires hanging down. That's your first tip. Second one is don't assemble this whole thing on your workbench and then put it on your vehicle. It's way too heavy. It's like 90 pounds. So what I did was I did it in 3 parts. So first I mounted the base, then I mounted the winch plate to the base, and then I mounted the winch on top. If you're going to do it this way, after you mount your winch bracket, before you put your winch plate on, run the 2 bolts through that connect up to the winch early, because you can't get to those bolts very easily because your skid plate's in the way. So put on your base, put on your winch plate, but then run your 2 back bolts for the winch in early, have them sticking up, and then drop your winch down on top of those 2 bolts, and then the 2 front ones you can do by hand right here. So that's a tip. Sorry I didn't film it. I was kind of in work mode, and I had basically it took 6 hours, and I wasn't in the mood to film it. But if you know what I'm talking about, that's a good tip for you. That'll save your bacon big time. So now let's talk a little bit about the wiring. The wiring is pretty darn easy. It's just a red and a black wire, as you can imagine, and it comes in a nice big thick harness, and you just run it right here behind your bumper, straight up here through your Bronco, right up to your battery. Black one goes to your black side of your battery, and the red one goes to the red side of the battery. Just unscrew them, screw them on, and you're good to go. The control is just simple handheld. It's in the back in the lockbox, but simple handheld, long cord, and it just says in and out, and it connects right here. So you just have this little connector, and that's it. So all in all, the install takes about 6 hours, but because this weighs about 90 pounds, I measured to see how much droop I'm going to get in the front, and I measured, and it was about 1/2 inch. So this will drop the front of your Bronco down about 1/2 inch, but in the front. But I have a rooftop tent coming. I got the new Blue Dot Voyager series from iCamper, and it's a new solo clam style tent. You know, the ones that go like this, and it's a solo. So it's only, and that solo, if you were to measure the roof of your Bronco and go on their website and see the measurements of the solo tent, it is exactly the size of the roof of the Bronco. Exactly. So that's what I got, because I travel alone. So I don't need a double-sized tent, and it only weighs like 130 pounds. So my thoughts are, because now that the front end of the Bronco is a 1/4 inch down, the back end is a 1/4 inch up, a little bit of a rake. Once I get that 130-pound tent put on top, that's going to bring it down 1/2 inch, most likely, and that'll level the car out. So that'll be coming here in December. I think that's when those start shipping. No one has them yet, but we'll do a video on that in the future. So let's talk about a few accessories. All right, now we're going to talk about a few accessories that I got. I got the Harbor Freight hook for the front. This is the hook that it comes with, and this hook will work just fine, but I'm kind of a geek and I like things that are kind of aesthetically pleasing, and this isn't. So I went ahead and got a Harbor Freight hook, which is kind of a grayish color, the same color as my Bronco, which I thought was kind of neat. Seems like you have a few more options here for hooking stuff up. It seems a little bit bigger, which I like. And then once you suck it in, this thing will kind of suck itself in and hold. But I put a little zip tie on here just to hold it in place, because honestly, I have wire cutters in my vehicle all the time, and I'm hardly ever going to use this winch, if ever. So I just put a little zip tie on there to keep it from moving up and down, because otherwise it's going to scratch the front of the plate up here. So anyway, that was one thing I got. It does come with the cord, you know, the little cord we all know about that hangs down, the little pull cord. That you can use to pull, but the problem is it's going to hang in it. My sensor is right here, my adaptive cruise control, and I really don't want that messing with it all, so I took it off. And to protect the investment, I went ahead and got a cover for it. I got this on Amazon for like 15 bucks or something like that, and some of them tend to fade, but the reviews on this one said it doesn't fade. And all it does, it just goes right over your winch, just like so. And this is going to help protect the winch. Now, it's yet to be determined if this is going to fly off on the freeway when I'm going 80, but it's certainly worth a try, because this is quite an investment, and that's a rope in there. It's not a wire, and I really don't want to get that rope wet. So if I can keep that rope dry, I think that would be, it's going to be optimal to have this winch covered up all the time. Now the hook is still exposed, but that's fine. I just don't want the rope to get wet or the motors to get wet at all. So anyway, let's give some final thoughts. Okay, before those final thoughts, I was just doing some editing on getting ready to put the video together, and I realized I missed a couple of important things that you need to know. So before the final thoughts, let's talk about one more thing. You do have these plastic pieces right here, which we pop off on either side of your tow hooks here. There's one on each side. You do have to take these off and do a little trimming to them, so you're going to need a Dremel tool to trim the plastic away from this area here, just to make these pieces to fit back on. Now in the instructions it tells you, it kind of gives you measurements on where to cut. I couldn't follow it at all, so what I did was I assembled everything, and it says this is one of the first steps to do. Save it for your last step. Get everything on, everything together, everything's wired. Your last step should be to take these plastic pieces and do your trimming. What I do is just use a white chalk pencil, and I just held it up and eyeballed it and drew on there with my eyeball where I thought it should be trimmed, and then I took it over and trimmed it. When this one worked, then I just mirrored it to the other side so that they mirror each other. It doesn't, and don't be too picky about how beautiful your dremeling is, or your cutting, because it's down here in the front and everything's black down here, and it just blends right in. Even the imperfections like what you have in this mount, the imperfections of your cutting down here, they just blend right in. So don't get too picky about it. Just cut it so these go back on, stick them back on. And that way you don't, and what these are covering up is the 3 giant bolts that hold your bumper on. That's what they're covering up. So as long as you can get those covered up, you're going to be fine. Secondly, the camera. Everyone's going to ask about the camera. Can I use my camera? No, it is, especially with this black cover on, the camera with the black cover on is 0. With the black cover off, it's about 2/3 block. So just assume that you don't have a camera anymore if you use this, which I don't use the front camera hardly at all, so I don't really care. But I think in the future, for about $170, you can get a camera relocation kit from a company, which I'll do a video on this because I'm going to do it eventually. I'll do a video on it when I get it, and I promise I'll put it on my channel. And it mounts right here in the front somewhere on the winch itself, and then your camera goes in there. That way your camera can look out over the front of the vehicle, but I just haven't done it yet. So, but when I do, I'll put a video out. Now, let's go to some final thoughts. So my overall thoughts from the time I received it to the time I installed it is, at first I was a little bit iffy on the quality of the actual mount, but once it's all assembled and put together and on the vehicle, you don't notice those imperfections, and honestly, I think it looks pretty good. Time will tell whether or not it'll rust or break. Same with the winch, it's 9,500 pounds. They do have a 1,200 pound version, or 12,000 pound version, but I got the 9,500, so once again, time will tell whether or not it's strong enough. I think it will be, especially if you use a pulley system. So all in all, so far I've been really impressed with it. The install was actually quite easy, took about 6 hours, but if you're patient and you have a little know-how, you can skip around the instructions to kind of suit your needs best, like installing it in 3 parts instead of as one whole part on your bench and then trying to put it on. I would install in 3 parts. Just in the sensors, everything seems to work just fine. The droop on the vehicle is about a 1/4 inch down on the front. It weighs like 90 pounds, so it's going to drop the front of your vehicle a little bit. No big deal. The accessories that I got for it, like the cover for it, I think that's probably a must to keep your rope nice and dry and keep your components dry. The hook, that's just more an aesthetic thing for me. I kind of like the look of that one instead of the one that came with it. Time will tell. I'm going to start running again in June. That's when I go out again, and hopefully we'll have a chance to use it a little bit. But yeah, for the price, you really can't go wrong. It's like a little over $600 for the whole thing. So I'm gonna have to give it so far I'm gonna have to give it probably a B+. So, but we'll see. One thing I wish they had was the 20-inch light that goes on there. It comes with a white light. It does not have the option for an amber. I wish they had an amber option for that. Now, when it comes to installing a different light into that grill area right here, I think that's going to be a bit of a push on how you're gonna mount that light in there, because it almost looks to me like, because there's only this bolt and one on the other side holding that front grill on. it looks to me like you're basically only set up to have the one light that comes from rough country to fit in there without doing some drilling. But I'm not sure on that. I would recommend calling rough country and seeing what their thoughts are on different lights going in there. But I wish they had an amber. If anyone has a mount system for these bolts, for an amber light to go here and one on the other side, please let me know, because the ambers on the front were very helpful when I had them, but I had to take them off to put the winch on. So upper lights are fantastic. The front lights, I could use a couple ambers. So if you know of a mounting system for that, let me know. So if you have adaptive cruise control and you're looking for a winch mount, this is going to be the one. So anyway, that's my thoughts on the rough country high winch mount. If you have any comments, feel free to put them below. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them down below, because I asked people on Bronco 6G tips and tricks on installing it, or questions I had. They would always respond to me and help me out along the way, and all those tips and tricks worked when I went to install. So feel free to comment below, send me a message asking me a question. How do I do this? How do I do that? How did you do this or that? I'd be happy to get back to you. So hopefully this helps you out.